All right, Shalom. First and foremost, call Halal Yamla, Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Harakak Wadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone, Ruwell, as well as Teachwell. And peace and salutation to the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. And in this video, I'm pretty much going to be going into an article, okay? News and prophecy update type video, if you will, okay? But basically, as you can see from the title of this article, and this is from the Newsbreak app, okay? And the source of this article is from Mediate, I'm guessing mediate.com, okay? But as you can see from the title of the article on the screen, it says, Trump orders Hegseth and Bondi to determine how military can be used in domestic law enforcement. All right. Then as it goes into it, it says, President Donald Trump directed Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi to determine how the U.S. military could be used for domestic law enforcement on Monday. All right. It continues to say, in an executive order titled, all right, an executive order titled Strengthening and Unleashing America's Law Enforcement to Pursue Criminals and Protect Innocent Civilians, Trump issued several directives, including the establishment of a legal defense mechanism for law enforcement officers and a crackdown on state and local officials who willfully and unlawfully direct the obstruction of criminal law, including by directly and unlawfully prohibiting law enforcement officers from carrying out duties. Okay? And then it says, the president also ordered Hegseth and Bondi to determine how military and national security assets and personnel can most effectively be utilized to prevent crime. See that? So basically, Trump, as it went into sign or is getting ready to sign an executive order, as it says right here. All right, if I can highlight it. All right, here we go. All right, Trump signed or is getting ready to sign an executive order that he titled Strengthening and Unleashing America's Law Enforcement to Pursue Criminals and Protect Innocent Civilians. All right. And as the title goes into, by using the military, active duty military officers, okay, all for the purpose of, fighting crime and cracking down on all the crime that's happening around the country and protecting, so-called protecting civilians, okay, a whole bunch of peace and safety, as the scripture speaks of, right? As a matter of fact, because speaking of that, all right, peace and safety. This is 1 Thessalonians 5. I'm going to start at verse 2. Okay, the Apostle Paul going into the day of the Lord. Okay, the day, all the times leading up to Yahweh Shai coming back. All right, this is 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 2. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. And we that are the hopeful elect know perfectly according to faith, according to the Spirit, as we measure the times diligently, that the day of the Lord is approaching as a thief in the night, okay, when these people least expect it. It says, verse 3, when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. You see, and what we saw, or rather what we just read in that article, okay, is, a form of peace and safety that the left hand through this Trump administration is getting ready to come down with, okay, tapping into using, active duty U.S. military personnel to help, fight against, to help, crack down on crime and, fight within the police force and law enforcement, okay, to bring forth, peace and safety. All right. And all it's going to lead to is just more destruction and more hell upon the average American, people. Okay. To fight against, whom this, the system is going to declare as criminals. Okay. Those that are, violating the laws. Okay. Going against the grain, going against the system. All right. And even as of recently, about maybe 2 weeks ago, you even had Trump. Okay. You even had articles and different information circulating around the internet where now Trump is even tapping into, you know, uh, uh, deporting U.S. citizens to, places like El Salvador and Guantanamo Bay. Okay. Citizens that, that he's going to deem as, enemies of the state and, coming up against the system and things like that. All right. So we the hopeful elect, we all, see what, the times that we're in. Okay. Esau, Edom is getting ready to come down with great wrath, getting ready to come down with the sword. Because what? Because he knows that he has a short time left. All right. And so, and as we see from this particular executive order, all right, by Trump, you know, getting ready to use the military to, help the law enforcement to, to crack down against crime and crack down against all this, chaos and wickedness that's going on in this country. Okay. This is all a part of Esau's, coming down with great wrath, coming down with the sword. Okay. Because, he's at the end. America is at its end. Babylon the Great is falling. This place cannot be healed. There's no coming back for America. There's no making this place great again. Okay. Esau is getting ready to establish his NWO system. All right. And as we can see, he's getting ready to do it partly by force. Okay. Literally making war against U.S. citizens. Okay. Both legal and illegal. Okay. Getting ready to justify, using the military to deport U.S. citizens out of the country to, Guantanamo Bay and El Salvador, things like that. Hey, because this is all further showing us, that, this guy Trump is indeed that cruel Lord spoken of in Isaiah the 19th chapter. All right. So, yeah, as this article goes into again, I'm going to start right here in paragraph 2. Like it. I'm going to start right here in paragraph 2. It says, in an executive order titled Strengthening and Unleashing America's Law Enforcement to Pursue Criminals and Protect Innocent Civilians. Because if you've been looking around, Babylon the Great over the last 4 years under the Biden administration, we've seen crime skyrocket at all-time highs across the country. Thefts at an all-time high. Certain stores around the country, especially out there in the West Coast, throughout California, San Francisco, and things, places like that, where theft was basically damn near illegal in states like that. All right, as long as the thieves didn't take over a certain amount of money worth of merchandise. Okay, just crime at an all-time high. The domestic violence and domestic crimes at all-time highs. All right. More division, more, people just crashing out and, bugging out. All right. And, over these past 4 years, especially under the Biden administration, this country has been in absolute chaos. Okay. And so now, now that, of course, the Biden administration is over with and Trump is back in office. Now, the powers that be are getting ready to use, Trump and his administration and the Republicans to now, so-called clean up the mess that Biden and the left, the Democrats, have, created in this country over the past 4 years. Okay, pushing that peace and safety. You see, and this, speaks to. All right, let's get Revelation the 13th chapter. All right, this is Revelation 13 and verse 11. It says, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, Okay, and this is speaking about America. Okay, Babylon the Great. This another beast that John the Revelator is seeing coming up out of the earth is talking about America, Babylon the Great, the USA. It says, and he had two horns like a lamb. Okay, the two horns being the Democrat and Republican parties, the two-party political system. Okay, like a lamb, you know, and a lamb. When when we read throughout the scriptures, a lamb is associated with the Messiah. That's why Yahweh Shai throughout the New Testament and throughout the volume of the book is likened to a lamb, sacrificial lamb for the nation of Israel, for the sins that we committed under that first covenant. Okay, and Yahweh Shai's blood was shed as a down payment for us to have this grace period to get ourselves ready to be entered into a new covenant when Yahweh Shai comes back. Okay, but throughout the volume of the book, the lamb is likened to a Messiah in a way, and that's how this whole Democrat Republican system comes at the people. You have these Democrat politicians or presidents or Republican politicians or presidents. You see them on TV with these suits and ties, so-called dressed nicely, making all these broken promises to the people, saying that they're going to do this, do that, and do this, make these, sign these particular laws, make these particular deals, okay, create more jobs for the people, okay, you know, just all these broken promises and these great swelling words, okay, and this old two-party political system, it presents itself as a lamb, like a Messiah to these people, or giving these people a false sense of hope or a false sense of salvation. But it says, and he spake as a dragon, and that's pretty much at the point where we're at right now, especially with this whole Trump administration. The Democrats and the left over the past 4 years have, presented themselves like a lamb, okay? Giving all the alphabets all types of rights, okay? Giving all these freaks and bug outs around the country, a sense of hope and a sense of pride and making them feel like they have a voice and things like that, okay? Presenting themselves like a lamb or, a type of Messiah, right? But now we're at a point, now that Trump and the Republicans are have pretty much taken the influence of the country. Now, this system is getting ready to speak as a dragon, okay? Which when we go into that word dragon, as our apostles and elders, always bring out this word dragon. It's like if this word dragon is Strong's G1404, Dracon, and it says dragon, a great serpent, a name for Satan, okay, or rather, a name for the Satan-like man, okay, the one who will come to do the bidding of Satan, which is who? Esau, Edom, okay, with all power, signs, lying wonders, left-hand miracles, all right. And even in the previous chapter from here, Revelation the 12th chapter, it speaks about Esau, Edom being that old serpent, okay, called the devil and Satan, okay, who rules over the revival of the red dragon, the revival of this ancient Roman, Greco-Roman system, which is America, along with NATO and the EU, okay. So this whole two-party political system, the Democrats and Republican, they've been presenting themselves for such a long time as a lamb, as some form of saviors, giving the so-called American people hope with all these broken promises and great swelling words. But now we're at a point where now, okay, both parties are getting ready to come down like a dragon, speak as a dragon, which as it went into the word dracon. Now, what that ultimately speaks to, okay, when you go into history of the Greeks, okay, that word dragon or dracon, it relates to a Draco or Draco, which is which was a Athenian lawgiver. Okay, let's look up some information on him. All right. So this is from the Google AI overview. It says Draco was an Athenian lawgiver. Okay, which, when you deal with Athenian or Athens, Athens was the capital of Greece. Okay, the capital of Greece. And that's why we here at Great Millstone. As we understand, the prophecies and the understanding of the four beasts in Daniel the seventh chapter. Okay, leading all the way down to the little horn that would come out of the fourth beast, pursuant to I believe Daniel 7 and 8. Okay, the fourth beast being the ancient Western Roman Empire. All right, and the little horn being America that would revive the fourth beast or revive the ancient Western Roman Empire. Okay, not only here in America do we see resemblance of ancient Roman customs and culture, but we also see resemblance of ancient Greek cultures and customs in this place as well. And that's why ancient Rome is also referred to as the ancient Greco-Roman Empire. Okay, and not only that, but not to mention what biblical nation of people ruled in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Esau. All right, the Esau Edom, the so-called white man. Okay, and as for Esau Edom is in power all over again. Okay, to fulfill his blessing. Okay, via America, NATO, and the EU, to revive that ancient Greco-Roman system. All right, and so as a reading right here, Draco was an Athenian lawgiver. Okay, an ancient Greek lawgiver from the 7th century BC, who was credited with creating the first written legal code in Athens around 621 BC. His code, known as the Draconian Constitution, okay, the Draconian Constitution, was renowned for its severity, with the death penalty being the punishment for most offenses, even minor ones. Okay, when you go into the history of this guy, Draco, and the certain draconian laws that he was issuing, he passed laws to like I said, to put you to death for for doing any little offense or any little crime, even such as jaywalking. Okay, when you go into the history of this guy, all right, and hey, under this guy Trump, the cruel Lord spoken of in Isaiah 19, and we're getting ready to see draconian measures or draconian laws all over again. As we read in that article, Trump is now tapping into, using the U.S. military to help fight crime. And who this system is getting ready to deem as criminals. Okay, it says, it goes into a little bit more information. It says, first written law code. Draco's code was significant because it replaced the previously oral tradition of law and justice with the written system. All right. Then it says, the punishments were harsh, and the death penalty was applied for a wide range of crimes, including stealing food, idleness, and even for involuntary homicide. Okay. And that's scripture speaks about in Isaiah 10:1. Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees. Okay. And these draconian measures at that time, during the time of the ancient Greeks, okay, were, unrighteous decrees. Well, guess what? As we've been seeing this guy Trump, okay, ever since his inauguration, signing all these executive orders, okay, to fight deportation and fight crime and, getting ready to instill AI within his government system, okay, slashing people's jobs by the thousands and 10,000s. These are all unrighteous decrees, okay? That's all going to lead to, draconian measures, the death penalty for any any little offense or crime, okay? Especially against the so-called American people, all right? And all of this is, and all of this is going to lead to, of course, uproars and sedition, as it speaks of in 2 Ezra 15. All right, because when Trump really fully goes full dragon mode, all right, enters the dragon, okay, the main people that's going to be coming up against him is these Edomites, these MAGA hat Edomites, all right, these red-blooded patriotic American Edomites that wholeheartedly put their faith in him and their trust in him to restore this country back to its so-called glory days and make it great again. All right. Well, you best believe when Trump passes more executive orders and more unrighteous decrees to label regular American citizens as enemies and criminals and use the military to come down with the sword upon them, these red-blooded Edomites are going to lose it. Okay, they're going to take it to the streets. I mean, the scripture speaks about it right here in prophecy in 2 Ezra 15, as we always go into 2 Ezra 15 verse 14. Woe to the world and them that dwell therein, for the sword and their destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands. Okay, sounds like all out anarchy. A purge like society. All right, civil war. And this is the environment that's looming in Babylon the Great. It says, verse 16, for there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor their princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. Yeah, people are going to be, taken into the streets, rising up against this government, rising up against this whole Trump administration, and the AI that they're getting ready to instill within this government system. All right, because all of this stuff is going to be taking away people's rights, taking away their constitutional rights, taking away their human rights, taking away their livelihoods and their jobs and their sources of income, okay, their access to food and resources, all right. And these red-blooded Edomites, these patriotic Edomites, are going to be the main ones taken into the streets, okay, fighting for, what little bit that, left that they have in their precious America, okay. And so, yeah, this guy Trump, hey, he's getting ready to make all our war against the so-called American people. Okay, these Edomites thought that this guy Trump, was put in office to make this country great again and restore Edomite pride back into America again. No, this man was ultimately put back in office to do the bidding of the elites. Okay, to establish, to usher in the NWO, and ultimately he was put in to do the will of Yahweh Shemal Shah. Okay, to come down with great wrath. All right, you know, cause this country to fall even more. All right, bring forth more division. All right, pretty much bring forth the end of Babylon the Great. Okay, now I want to go back to something in this AI overview again, where it says right here, severity and punishments. It says the punishments were harsh and the death penalty was applied for a wide range of crimes, including stealing food, idleness, and even for involuntary homicide. And you see, and what's interesting, as I said, people were, put to death under draconian measures for stealing food. Now, what's interesting is, over the past week or so, you've had, big time retailers such as Walmart, Amazon, different other, retailers and whatnot, warning of, empty shelves, coming to the stores of America starting as early as next month in May, due to, the tariffs that Trump's, put on China. Okay. So, you know, should we start to, to see the, shelves being empty, grocery store shelves being empty, okay? The full storehouses being found empty as it speaks of in 2 Ezra 6 and 22. What is that going to lead to? People, looting and stealing out of the store, okay? People fighting over food and resources, okay? And I find that interesting how, these things are looming, possibly starting next month. The store shelves beginning to be empty due to the tariffs, and then now Trump, okay, tapping into using the U.S. military to fight against crime and you know bring forth peace and safety. All of this stuff is all coming together. Okay, it's all coming together. Clearly we see the direction that the elites are trying to bring this country, to all out chaos, all out anarchy. Okay, to establish their left hand order out of chaos. Okay, to establish an NWO system governed by AI and issuing forth the digital ID of via the charagma. Okay, to bring this country back to some type of order and structure again. Okay, it's all coming together, and it's all pointing to the fact that Babylon the Great is falling. Esau is getting ready to go with his move. Come down with great wrath to establish his left hand order, his NWO system. All right, and of course, okay, we can't forget this point as well. As we're going into in this article, Trump is basically tapping into using the military to fight against, crime and who he deems as criminals, right? Well, guess what? Hey, we the hopeful elect, especially those of us that are on the front lines preaching this gospel and singing a new song, we know for sure that this is especially going to be aimed to target, the men of Yahweh Shemal Shah, starting with our apostles of Great Millstone down to the least of us. Okay? Because we're going to be looked at as criminals and offenders for a word. Okay? Offenders for this gospel that we preach. Because like it says in, was that Psalms 37? Let's see. Upright conversation. Yep. This is Psalms 37 and verse 14. It says, "The wicked have drawn out the sword." All right. And we know Esau Edom is the wicked, pursuant to Malachi 1 and 4, the border of wickedness. Okay. And Esau Edom was blessed with the sword, pursuant to Genesis 27. Blessed with the sword to rule over the fatness of the earth. Okay. And much wickedness. All right. It says, Psalms 37, verse 14, "The wicked have drawn out the sword and have bent their bow to cast down the poor and needy." Who is the poor and needy represent? The elect, the remnant, okay, who would trust in the name of Yahweh Shemal Shah, pursuant to Zephaniah, I believe the third chapter, where it talks about the poor and afflicted who would trust in the name of the Lord. Okay, it says, "And to slay such as be of upright conversation." Okay, upright anastrophe, upright in doctrine, upright in speech, upright in conduct, okay, upright in spirit, and that's us, the hopeful elect, because when Esau Edom comes down with great wrath, all right, pursuant to Revelation 12 and verse 12, Revelation 12, verse 12, it says, "Therefore rejoice ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil," okay, Esau Edom, "is come down unto you having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time." Okay, a short time left to rule in his blessing. Okay, a short time left to establish his NWO system before Yahweh Shah comes back. Okay, Esau Edom is getting ready to come down with great wrath with the sword. He had bent his bow like we read in Psalms 37. And as we go down in the same chapter, who was Esau Edom's great wrath, going to be targeting mainly. Okay, this is down in verse 17, Revelation 12, verse 17. "And the dragon," all right, the dragon being, all right, the ancient Western Roman system, which America is the revival of the ancient Western Roman system, the revival of this great red dragon that you read of in this chapter. Okay, And the dragon was wroth with the woman being Israel, okay, the nation of Israel, so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. In the book of Jeremiah, the Lord likened the nation of Israel to a comely and delicate woman. All right. So it says, and the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. You see that? So when Esau Edom comes down with great wrath through, bringing down a sword, martial law, robot dogs, okay, robot soldiers, okay, making the men of the Lord an offender for a word through his propaganda, through AI, through deep fakes and things like that, okay. His main wrath is going to be targeted against the remnant of our people, the elect, okay. It says, which keep the commandments of Yahweh Shema Shai, which, we fulfilled the law through the Spirit. We keep the law to the best of our ability through this grace period. And it says, and have the testimony of Yahweh Shai, in pursuant to Revelation 19. What is the testimony of Yahweh Shai? The spirit of prophecy, okay? Singing a new song, the everlasting gospel. What? Preaching that the Lord's getting ready to bring judgment, okay? Babylon the Great is fallen, all right? Don't worship this beast system or its image or take its charagma, all right? Or else you're going to be destroyed by way of nuclear fire, okay? Esau wants, us, us the hopeful elect with this talking point to be rooted out of the earth. He ultimately wants us to be, put back into the spirit world because of this gospel, this testimony that we preach. And because we no longer stay upon him and his system, but we stay upon Yahweh Shema Shai. So Esau's, his main portion of his great wrath is going to be targeted against, us, the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel. We're going to be deemed, we're the main ones going to be deemed as criminals and enemies of the state and a threat to public safety, okay, before it's all said and done. Esau's going to make us an offender for a word, all because we, stand in upright conversation, upright anastrophe, all right? And that's why, as the Lord tells us in Isaiah 59, Isaiah 59, verse 19, it says, so shall they fear the name of the Lord Yahweh Shema Shai from the west, which is what we're doing right now. We're in the main bulk of the elect is here in the Western Hemisphere, here in Babylon the Great America. Okay, fearing the name of Yahweh Shema Shai. Okay, and it says, and his glory from the rising of the sun, which represents what? The east. All right, because the elect of the nation of Israel are scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, north, south, east, and west. Okay, fearing and calling upon the name of Yahweh Shema Shai. It says, when the enemy, who is the enemy, Esau Edom, shall come in like a flood with great wrath, the spirit of the Lord Yahweh Shema Shai shall lift up a standard against him. You see that? So, we know, pursuant to Revelation 2 and 10, that, the devil Esau Edom, when he comes down with great wrath, he's going to cast some of us into prison and give us tribulation, as Yahweh told us. All right. But then again, that's just it. All right. The Lord is only going to allow Esau Edom to get some of us. All right. Not half of us, not most of us, and damn sure not all of us. All right. And why is that? Because as we just read, when Esau comes down with great wrath like a flood, okay, those of us, the hopeful elect, that fear and call upon the name of Yahweh Shema Shai, the Lord's going to lift up a standard for us against him, okay? And, part of that standard, okay, as we know, the Lord's going to give certain brothers, spiritual powers, okay? Spiritual powers to, help defend ourselves, all right? And as well, another part of that standard, as we read here in Daniel 12 and 1, it says, and at that time, all right, at what time? Jacob's trouble. Okay, when Esau comes down with great wrath and persecution. Okay, it says, shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. Okay, so part of that standard, that the Lord's going to lift up for us against our enemies is also, using the holy angels to help defend us and protect us. All right, and as we see right here, the archangel Michael, the Lord's going to use to help protect us. Okay, and lift up a standard for us. It says, "And there shall be a time of trouble, Jacob's trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time." Okay, and at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. Okay, written in the book of life. All right, and the elect names and spirits are recorded in the heavens. Okay, chosen of Yahweh Shema Shah before the foundation of the heaven and the earth to be delivered in these times. And Lord will not be of that number. Okay, because hey, with the with unrighteous decrees and draconian measures, such as what we see here on the screen by this guy Trump. Hey, we're gonna need Yahweh Shema Shah more than ever in these times. Okay, to defend us. All right, to fight against our enemies. Okay, to protect us. To make sure that we endure to the end. All right, because hey, all hell is getting ready to break loose throughout America, Babylon the Great, and throughout this world. Okay, and all out chaos is getting ready to ensue. It's getting ready to be an all-out war against righteousness, against morals, against manhood, against Yahweh Shema Shai. All right, and that's why, as the scripture speaks about, let's get what's that? Sirach 4. Yeah, this is Sirach 4:28. It says, "Strive for the truth unto death, and the Lord shall fight for thee." Okay, strive for the truth unto death. Stand stiffly for the name of Yahweh Shema Shai unto death. Yahweh Shema Shai shall fight, shall fight for us. Lift up a standard for us against our enemies, And as Yahweh Shai told us in Revelation 2:10, which I quoted it earlier, but now I'm going to read it. The Spirit is on me to read it. This is Revelation 2, verse 10. This Yahweh Shai speaking. He says, "Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer." Okay, yeah. Don't fear Jacob's trouble. Don't fear, Esau, Edom coming down with the sword, and issuing forth, martial law and, using his military to come up against who he deems as criminals and enemies of the state and this and the third. Okay. Yahushua has given us straightforward commandment. Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil, Esau, Edom, shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried. See that? It's all going to be to try us, to test our faith. All right? The Lord not going to, let us fall into this man's hands, all right, Esau, Edom's hands, for the purpose of us being destroyed. Okay? No. It's all ultimately going to be to test our faith. Okay? And it says, "And ye shall have tribulation 10 days," all right, a perfect amount of days, according to our measure of faith. And it says, and he says, "Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life." Yeah, Yahweh has given us straightforward commandment. Be faithful unto death. Strive for the truth even unto death. Okay? And the Lord shall fight for thee. All right, and give us a crown of life. All right. So yeah. So hey, these are the times that we're in. Esau, Edom, through this Trump administration, is getting ready to come down with great wrath. All right, uses military, uses sword. Okay, getting ready to, he is getting ready to enter the dragon. Okay, he's getting ready to come with it. But it's all because he's not about to get the victory. No, it's all because he knows that he has but a short time left, and that we're about to get the victory. We the hopeful elect. As the scripture speaks about, we ought to fret not, nor be afraid, because ultimately, we know we got Yahweh Shema Shai, protecting us and with us, even unto the very end. Okay, so strive for the truth, even unto death. Be not afraid, as Yahweh Shai spoke of. Okay, And so I'm pretty much leave it there. This pretty much it's kind of news and prophecy update of the signs of the times, and Esau getting ready to come down with great wrath through his military, through his sword. All right, but hey, we the hopeful elect, we already know what's written, that the elect are ultimately said to get the victory of all these things. So we just have to pretty much remain faithful, continue being diligent, sincere, continue putting our hands to the plow, serving Yahweh Shema Shai, in sincerity and faith. Okay, doing what the Lord Yahweh Shema Shai requires of us in His grace period. And hey, Yahweh Shema Shai is going to take care of the rest for us, protect us and make sure that we endure to the end and overcome all these things that Esau is getting ready to come down with. All right. So so Lord willing, this video is edifying. And until next time, shalom.